My fiance and I had a lot of fun filming that, and somehow I'm not magically more ripped or muscular or anything after that whole montage, but it was a lot of fun making it. But anyway, Creed 3 is Michael B. Jordan's directorial debut, and it of course stars Michael B. Jordan as Adonis Creed, Jonathan Majors as Damian Anderson, and Tessa Thompson as Bianca Creed. I really enjoy the Creed movies, especially the first one. They take all the cheesiness and campiness out of the Rocky franchise, and they took themselves a lot more seriously while still respecting their roots, and that's a hard thing to do. And Creed 3 is no exception. This film was a total blast from start to finish. We're dropped a few years after the end of the second Creed film, where Adonis has been thriving in both his career and family life. But when Damian, a childhood friend played by Jonathan Majors, resurfaces, the face-off is more than just a fight. At first, that synopsis might sound like filler. At least that's what it sounded like to me. Even when I was watching the trailers in the theater, I kept thinking, he's already the champion. What is the point of this? It seemed like Adonis had already overcome so many of his demons. I mean, he's the champion at this point. He has a daughter and a beautiful family. He has everything he ever wanted. What's left? If you think back to the first Creed movie, there's a lot of time skipped between when we see him as a little kid. We knew that there's probably a lot that happened in that time, but this movie found a way to make that really meaningful while not feeling like a side story at all. And I don't think this storyline could have been as convincing if it wasn't for Jonathan Majors' performance. He's becoming one of my favorite actors. He gives such a convincing performance. It was unbelievable, especially having just seen him as King the Conqueror, where he also was super convincing as a totally different character. It felt like Adonis and Damian had a lot to work out, and that's what made this movie so great. Because just like the Rocky films, they're at their best when it's not all about the boxing. For example, the first Rocky movie for me is my absolute favorite, because at the end of the day, it's a love story between Rocky and Adrian. The second movie comes around, and it feels like Rocky cares way too much about beating Apollo Creed. I mean, look at the end, Rocky yells, "Yo, Adrian, I did it," instead of, "Adrian, I love you." I don't know, there's just something different about that. And interestingly, it feels like it's affected the Creed trilogy in a really similar way, where the first film's all about Adonis finding himself and all this self-actualization, and Rocky finding purpose again. But then the second Creed movie, just like the second Rocky film, becomes way too much about the boxing and beating this specific opponent. And that's why Creed 3 was so refreshing. It was not just about the boxing. Even the boxing matches that were really well done, by the way, we'll talk more about that later, they were all symbolic. It felt like it was more about the journey, not necessarily a victory. It felt like they were working things out. There was so much emotion, so much history. It felt like a post-coming of age story, something that was delayed by a really clever plot device that it uses. That gave Creed 3 a really solid foundation that made it super enjoyable for me, and it's hard not to enjoy this film. Now, for Michael B. Jordan's first time behind the camera, this was extremely impressive. This was one of the best directed Rocky movies in my opinion, not only because the fights were so well directed, but also because of the symbolism that they portrayed. There's this one sequence in the final fight that's my favorite part of the whole movie, and it's because of the visual symbolism of what's going on between them and what they're working out while they're fighting. I've never seen a Rocky movie not only take itself that seriously, but also find a way to make the fight more meaningful than just a fight. And as for the way it's directed itself, it was super different. I really enjoyed it. You felt like you could see every movement, exactly where they were hitting each other. Every punch they landed was painful, man. You could feel it. If you guys have ever seen the movie Real Steel, it's a really underrated film that I like to rewatch a lot. When the robots are fighting each other, I always loved listening to that on a good speaker system because of just how visceral those punches are. You can feel the metal clanging. That's how it was in this film as well, and I don't think it's just because I went to a theater. I think that's just how the sound design was done. And although you could tell they used more CGI, I like the fact that it felt more theatrical. But I can see why some people might not like that because we are straying further and further away from the sort of grounded film that the Rockies were. But that's actually what this movie does best, in my opinion, is the fact it stands on its own for the first time out of all three Creed movies. The other two Creeds relied a lot on Rocky and Sylvester Stallone's amazing performance. This is the first film without Rocky in it, and it's definitely going in its own direction, but it definitely is standing on its own. It's the first one where I can really say it doesn't feel like a Rocky movie, it feels like a Creed movie, and I'm really excited about that. It's darker, a little bit grittier, and Michael B. Jordan's directing definitely gave it its own tone that I think it really benefited from. And there's also no good guy and bad guy. It's really gray the entire time. At times I wasn't even sure who to root for. You can really understand where both guys are coming from. I mean, Jonathan Majors' background makes total sense why he'd feel this certain way. I mean, almost to the point where he seems like the good guy at times, like he's the protagonist. But then you have Michael B. Jordan's character on the other hand, where you totally totally understand where he's coming from, and this film has no black or white. There's no clear protagonist and antagonist. I felt conflicted when I watched this film, honestly, because I could see myself in both positions, and I wasn't sure how you could resolve that conflict that neither person really created and neither person was really at fault. There's something so much more interesting about that than a clear antagonist like a big Russian dude showing up with this high-tech gym to come beat up Rocky. And I really hope that Michael B. Jordan returns behind the camera to keep producing and directing these movies, because this is one of the most mature Rocky movies I've ever seen. And he gives so much attention to performance as well. There are times when the camera is just sitting on characters in silence. And when you have an actor like Jonathan Majors giving such a nuanced performance with so many different emotions he's conveying while saying nothing, he deserves that screen time. And while he captured those moments so well, he also captured the explosive, really dangerous energy being given off by Jonathan Majors' character. There's something foreboding about him while he's on screen. You feel like he's ready to do something dangerous at any second. He makes you uncomfortable while you also get him and like him. There's so much going on. But he's also clearly a little bit out of control, and there's a sense of that. It's palpable on screen. And then you have a fantastic performance also from Michael B. Jordan, where he's conveying a ton of emotion in every scene too, in conversations he's having, and this conflict you can see on his face with all this unresolved childhood stuff that he's been repressing down this whole time. At the end of the day, there's nothing really original about any of this. It's just that the execution is so well done, I can't see anyone calling it unoriginal. My only issues with the film are really nitpicky. There were times when the CG just was executed very poorly or felt unnecessary at times. And it's something I noticed in the other Creed movies as well. I don't know why they feel the need to green screen things randomly, like when they first come out for the fight and you can tell the audience and the sky are all green screen. You see the little halo around them. It just looks bizarre. And there was a lot of CG in the final fight that I could see some people having an issue with. For the budget this movie had, I will admit it didn't look as good as I'd expected to, but the way they used the CG was at least pretty clever, and it was used to get across some story points that I thought benefited the movie. My only real issue for the film, though, is that I didn't think that the build-up for the final fight was very effective. They sort of hinted that Creed was getting older and he'd have trouble training at this age, and then all of a sudden it's just like, you're good. Even when Rocky was in his prime shape in the first Rocky movie, he's really young. It's so emotional when he finally gets in shape and motivates himself and he's at the top of the stairs. Everyone remembers that. And even the first Creed film, I remember when he's running down the street and all those kids on dirt bikes are following him. Then Rocky's looking at him out the window, and there's something special about that moment too. I just felt like there was really nothing like that. It felt like they were just trying to get it out of the way to get to the next scene. I also feel like it was a little bit hard to believe that Damien was at the level he was in terms of his boxing ability. They just sort of implied and rushed his progression. I thought it was really sloppy. But like I said, those are nitpicks. This film was superbly paced, amazingly directed, fantastic performances all around. The sound design was punchy and memorable, and I can't recommend enough that you go see it, not only if you're a fan of the Creed movies, but even if you love the Rocky movies and you're not caught up on the Creeds, now's the time. It's proving itself to be a really good trilogy. The only movie I'm not a huge fan of is the second one. Overall, guys, this film was a total blast and is definitely worth going to see in the theaters just for the sound alone. Adrian! Adrian!